This, as Rob said, this story really revolves around this nearly 28-inch tall salt glazed stoneware jar, shown here on the screen, and it's signed by David Jarbor, who was a free black potter working in Alexandria in the early to mid 19th century. Now, note the spelling of the name Jarbor. Robert Leith and others said, well, track him down in the documentary record. And I wish life were so easy. But we find in period documents not one spelling, not two spellings, but 7 found so far. And if there's a Jarbor spelling with a T and one spelled with a G, who knows what else is lurking in the yet uncovered documents. So if your mind isn't already spinning, just try saying Jarbor jar 7 times fast. And something for any of you Star Wars aficionados, this is Jar Jar. But for our purposes, I am going to use the Jarbor spelling as it's incised on the object. Now, we don't know exactly when David Jarbor was born. He shows up in the Free Negro Registers of Alexandria in 1821 as being a black man of about 33 years. Doing the math, that means he was born in the late 1780s or early 1790s. And some have suggested that he was born in St. Mary's City because an Alexandria potter named Louis Plum witnessed Jarbor's emancipation papers, and Plum was originally from St. Mary's City. Well, that's one theory, and very plausible, but he may also have been from Alexandria originally, since there was a woman named Cassandra Jarbor, and remember that was one of those alternate spellings for Jarbor. And Cassandra was in Alexandria around the time when David Jarbor would have been born. Searching through the Alexandria records, we find a Rebecca Dover Jarboe, who is listed in 1813 as, excuse me one moment, as David Jarbor's wife and the daughter of Samuel and Betty Dover. In that year, a Quaker businessman named Ezra Kinsey testified on behalf of the Dover family, stating that he had known the family for over 20 years and that, quote, they have always been considered free. Now, what it meant to be considered free in 19th century America really is a dissertation in itself. This is a registration certificate allowing a free black to reside within the city of Alexandria. And the document is really a rare survival, but this is an example of what the Dovers and David Jarbor would have been mandated to carry. The law required African Americans, freeborn and emancipated, to register with the courthouse and update that registration on a regular basis. This is probably a good place to mention the Kinseys a little bit more. They were Quakers, tanners by trade, but in addition to being local businessmen, they were very involved in the community at large. Ezra and Zenas were instrumental in the workings of the Friendship Fire Company in Alexandria, and they were involved in assisting the African American community in Alexandria at large. And it's really been interesting. I've been working on several other projects lately that have gotten me looking at some records also in Alexandria, but then in Philadelphia, and the Kinseys had come from Philadelphia in the early part of the 19th century. And they were doing the same thing there. So they were just really creating networks wherever they went and helping the African-American populations. Well, digging a little deeper through the Alexandria County Courthouse records, we find that David Jarbor had at least 5 children. It was David Jr., Rachel, Samuel, Mary, and Chloe. They were all listed in the Free Negro Registers of Alexandria between 1838 and 1847, and most of them affirmed to be free blacks by none other than Zenas Kinsey. Looking through the documents for Jabor, we find an 1822 will for Alexandria resident Spencer Gray. Now, Spencer left David Jabor $10 and qualified that bequest with the phrase, to my friend David Jarboe. The exact role that Spencer Gray had played in David Jarboe's life is a point of research still in the works, but Gray was known to have assisted other free blacks in Alexandria, especially in bankruptcy cases, so perhaps he had previously assisted Jabor. Turning our focus to Alexandria as a city, what can we say? Well, it's situated on the waterfront of the Potomac and was a prime location for shipping. The strip of shops and warehouses on the waterfront was known as the Strand. And in the words of the artist Lewis Miller, whose view of the city is shown here, Alexandria was, quote, elevated and pleasant. Now, from those wharfs on the Strand, Alexandria's businesses and manufactories extended perpendicular inland, providing easy access for the movement of finished products to the shops and to the waterfront. Additionally, by the first quarter of the 19th century, Alexandria's newspapers were spreading the word about turnpikes that connected Alexandria's manufacturing areas and port to more inland communities, such as Fauquier County, which was west of Alexandria. Now, remember Fauquier County, we'll return there shortly. Alexandria was often referred to as Little Philadelphia because of its grid layout, seen more clearly on this period plan. Pardon me for a moment here, we'll just orient ourselves with the compass rose. That's a little better. Now, at this spot, this green star, was the Quaker meeting house. And that's important to our story because of the 2 free black neighborhoods in Alexandria, both started by Alexandria Quakers in the late 18th and early 19th centuries. Now, the Bottoms neighborhood on South Alfred Street, roughly about here, and Hayti, which was a neighborhood on South Royal Street within this area. Now, within close proximity was the Wilk Street pottery, Alexandria's center of ceramic production, really from 1813 until about 1876. In addition to David Jabor, there were at least 14 other free African Americans who worked at the pottery. And we should note that in 1820, out of a population of approximately 10,000, over 13% were free blacks. And by 1840, that percentage was nearly 19%. Now, this is the historical marker for the pottery, today the site of the modern Tannery House condominiums, and the tannery, being the Kinseys. But in the period, there was actually, as I mentioned, a tannery across the street, and that was located, well, you can see on this little grid map, but that was the business venture of the Kinseys brothers. And over the years, the Wilk Street Pottery was under the management of 3 different owners, some of whom we've already heard mentioned today. So firstly, there was John Swan. Secondly, Hugh Smith and his sons. And thirdly, Benedict Milburn. Now, do you remember me mentioning Cleo Jarbor, who was one of David Jarbor's children? Well, Milburn actually attested to her status as a free black and signed her affidavit. It was a small world. But if you want to know the broader story of those pottery managers, I strongly encourage you to read Barbara Magid's articles in the 2012 and 2013 issues of Ceramics in America. Throughout the tenures of Smith and Milburn, the Alexandria flower motif, as it is frequently referred to by collectors today, persisted. And these are just a couple of examples of this wonderful and familiar motif. And you can see several objects decorated with it here at MESDA, on view in the Mariners Ceramics Gallery, and also at Colonial Williamsburg when you next venture to Virginia. But keep this flower in mind if you're not already familiar with it. Now, David Jarbor received his freedom in 1820 when he purchased it from Zenas Kinsey for $300, as we see here in Jarbor's manumission. Made and incised 10 years later in 1830, this jar is the only signed and dated object made by Jarbor. Now look closely at the jar itself. What do you notice? Its exuberant decoration, which veered away from the Alexandria flower. On the one side, in broad and sweeping brush strokes, is a tulip-like flower. Atop a central stem with leaves more akin to fern fronds. And on the other side is an unusual blossom, again extending up from a central stem and similar frond-like foliage. The tulip was fairly obvious, but I consulted with a couple of master gardeners in an effort to identify the second bloom, and they conferred that it was closest, at least, to a chrysanthemum. But this again is the base of that large storage jar, and how I wish we had more signed pieces and could tie a neat bow around all the objects that David Jarbor made. But instead, we can apply what we know about the decoration on the sign jar and the script underneath, and use the jar as a kind of Rosetta Stone to attribute other objects to Jarbor's hand. So I realize this gets into a little bit more aesthetics, but it's, exactly what do I mean? I think we can look at this way for a moment. And also, I thank Luke for showing so many of the pieces with kind of the central flower decoration. I think that, if anything, probably Jarbor was looking at some of those pieces. We'll look at the decoration on a few other pieces as well. And this jar, for example, it's really easy to see the likeness and equally profusely decorated. And note the miniature frond-like leaves on the reverse. Now, following those same lines, we can really start to see patterns in the decoration of the Alexandria-made pots. The central stem and flower and the frond-like leaves. Now, the hand of the same decorator can also be seen on less profusely painted objects, such as this jug that's beautifully executed Alexandria flower motif. But this piece is particularly special because it also includes an incised D on its base, not unlike the D seen on the base of our jar that was the initial for David and David Jarbor. By examining the basis of other objects, we're able to again see similarities in style of decoration coupled with the incised initial. Now, let's return to our Rosetta Stone. The Jarbour storage jar, as we heard from Brad Rauschenberg, it came into MESDA's collection in 1977. It was the gift of descendants of Henry and Frances Ellenworth Smith, who resided at Westview in Marshall, now part of Fauquier County. This is the house, Westview, not a very large home, about 1.5 stories, English basement, and didn't include a wraparound porch. It's interesting just from the architectural standpoint. It's Gothic revival architecture. It's a little strange given the size of the house. But Henry Smith was the son of this man, who was William Raleigh Smith of Alton. Another home in Fauquier County, seen in the black and white photo at the bottom. So Henry built Westview on the land his father gave him when he turned 21. And then this is a photo entry of Westview, and you notice the stoneware cracks on either side of the door here. And we know from Brad now that where the Jarbour jar was at the time. But I think that it's interesting to notice these stoneware pieces is that these appear in 2 different sets of Virginia Department of Historical Resources photos that were taken 30 years apart, really apparently frozen in time. So I checked the inventories and wills of these Smiths, hoping for an entry to include the Jarbour jar, but alas, it was in neither. At best, we can assume that because of its utilitarian nature, the Jarbour jar was probably clumped into this entry, along with the jars that flanked the front door. So how did a large stoneware jar made in Alexandria get to Marshall in Fauquier County? Probably not via Highway 66. But I think it makes good sense that it traveled down that Fauquier-Alexandria turnpike that we mentioned earlier. And it's interesting to note that Hugh Smith, somewhat in the style of Josiah Wedgwood, was very involved in the development and maintenance of several different turnpikes, but for our story today, in particular, the Fauquier and Alexandria turnpike. Well, thankfully, the jar made it into the collections here at MESDA in the 1970s, and it's been part of MESDA's collection ever since, really telling the story of the free black potter David Jarbour. National recognition has been given to free black potter and entrepreneur Thomas Pomeroy of Manhattan, and to the enslaved potter David Drake of Edgefield, South Carolina. David Drake was known for his ability to throw very large and successful pots. And Jarbour, too, was a master at his craft. The size of this jar alone would be a feat for any potter. But it was thrown in at least 2 sections and then put together. And I wish you could pick it up because you would be surprised at its weight. Most pots this size are good 40 to 50 pounds, but this example is so thinly potted that it's about 10 pounds lighter. There's evidence of a horizontal join approximately halfway up the sides. And at that join, you'll notice that the slight slump, which was the result of a heavy object being stacked on top of the jar during the firing. Well, the story of David Jarbor has really only begun to unfold, and we don't know when he died. Sadly, so many of the graves of free blacks who lived on the margins of Alexandria do not survive. There's still much to learn about Jarbor and his pots, and the broad outlines of Alexandria's stoneware history have been put forth by scholars and collectors in the last 15 years, but still more remains to be addressed. Now, we've had the opportunity to uncover a lot in just these few short minutes together, but there's still much more to find. And if we listen to the objects and couple that with the documentary evidence and the archaeology, we can better paint the unfinished portrait of Jarbor and so many others. Tomorrow we'll have the opportunity to look in the galleries here at MESDA, and I hope that when you go, or if you have already been, I hope when you go back, that you'll look anew or with new appreciation at the Jarbor jar, and just with new appreciation and new eyes. And I think I am very grateful to the Mariners and to everybody with the MESDA Summer Institute this summer, and Suzanne Hood and Rob Hunter for all of their assistance. Thank you all for listening.